When Deltora Quest hit shelves in the year 2000, it was the coolest looking book series around, and 10-year-old me, who was used to the airbrushed fantasy art of the 80s, took notice. While it was still airbrushed, artist Marc McBride's art brought energy and excitement back to the children's fantasy genre. The series went on to sell more than 18 million copies worldwide, and was even adapted into a Japanese anime series. I spoke with McBride, who suggested he paint a dragon while we talked.
Do you think that would work, Marcus? Should we do that?
To learn how he became involved in the world of Deltora.
Belfast was a pretty crazy place when I lived in it. It actually mentions in the back of the glim that I think it says I used to draw in the wardrobe. That's actually true. We had this wardrobe and it was just quiet where you draw because we lived in quite a small sort of house and the IRA would be sort of in the street type thing. And it wasn't really scary, but it was just sort of like noisy. So I sort of didn't really talk as a kid and just sort of hid in this wardrobe, which is a bit Narnia, isn't it? When we were at school, we liked art. There was one subject that we were told we could do, and that was architecture. So I was all set to do architecture. And then my parents, living in Belfast, just wanted to get out of there and moved to Australia. So I started architecture, but it was kind of hard not having any support. So came to Australia, ended up staying there and studied design instead. And it felt like in Australia, there was a lot more opportunities than in Northern Ireland. So I moved from Perth to Sydney. And I was taking my portfolio around to publishers, and I took it into Scholastic, and they said to me, "Mark, you like monsters? Well, guess what? We're doing a series on monsters. It's going to be called Deltora Quest. It's written by someone called Emily Rodda. They're telling me about this series, but the catch was they already had an illustrator, and I thought it was coming up to the Sydney Olympics. Everything that I was commissioned to do was to do with sport, and I thought I've got to get this job." So I went back to Bondi where my studio was and I painted 3 of the covers. It was 1 week I did the first 3. So I would have done Forest of Silence, City of the Rats and the Lake of Tears. And I just worked all through that because I was so excited. It was on such a buzz. But I remember I took them into Scholastic and everyone from all the departments came running out. It was really awesome. And they were quite big. They always exaggerate because they love telling me the story. They say it was the size of a door. And they said, "Wow, look at this guy's done." And they gave me the job. And I didn't really know that much about it at the time. I knew that what the monsters were. I had a brief description. And the only thing I knew was that Emily Rodda was happy to have a monster on the cover because I don't really like drawing people. Because when you read a book, you imagine you're the person. And, if you're like, if the kid in the book's got blonde hair and you've got, different color hair, it's kind of hard to relate to that because a book's the only time where you actually become someone else. You read their thoughts, you get into their head. From memory, there was a Lord of the Rings, a very early Lord of the Rings that had that sort of round oval space at the top of the book. And I remember thinking, wouldn't it be great to use the gemstones as the title block? I got to design it all myself, which pretty much never happens these days. These days, when you do a cover, you have a marketing committee that can go on for weeks.
A unique feature of the series was the Belt of Deltora and its different gemstones that ran down the spine of each book.
I can't remember whose idea was to have it on the spine. And again, there was a bit of criticism from librarians. Hard to tell which book it was, but I thought that was really fun. I remember I'd done all the covers by the time I met Emily Rodda. She gave me a big hug, I remember, and she said, "Those covers are exactly how I imagined it." Just like straight away, Emily said she liked every cover, and pretty much what I did first time was what they went with. On average, it takes about 3 days to airbrush one of the covers. The longest one was Cavern of the Fear, because it was like an octopus and each tentacle was the same and it had 10 fingers at the end of every tentacle. And just making something stand out was kind of tricky. I remember Isle of the Dead, the one time that I sort of got things a little bit wrong, Emily was saying to me, "This one's going to be underwater, Mark." So I wanted it to be like a kelp-like monster, but for some reason, and this is how my brain works, I got kelp and carp mixed up, and I thought, she wants like a goldfish monster. How is that going to work? So I drew this like scary goldfish monster, and she just got back to me and said, like, "What are you doing? Like, what is this?" She eventually worked out you've got carp and kelp mixed up, and how can you do that living in Bondi? The second book in the second series, which was a spider, I remember I was living in Sydney at the same time, and I had to go to Melbourne that day, and I think I had like half a day to do that one. And I did it really fast. Like that one, I just sent it to them, and I think it was going to go to print, and I was just very lucky that they didn't want any changes, because if they did, I wouldn't have been there for it.
Now, more than 20 years later, McBride is still excited by the love people have for the Deltora books and his art.
The role of art is to expose society, where we're going. And in a way, yeah, you can look at art as the most trivial thing, but in a way, it's the most important thing. Like good writing, good stories, they last forever. They outlive everything. Doing something like Deltora Quest, although I'm not putting it on a pedestal, I know it was just a fun thing to do. But for me, it was everything that I loved. And for me to do something like that sort of in its own way enters the zeitgeist, and that kids at that age looked at for so long, like that to me is like, wow, that's what art transcends a little bit. So hopefully I'll get to do something like that again one day.